In our last devotional, Pastor DP and I talked about how God has baked into us a unique design. What's equally amazing is that each of us has a unique story that adds to the sense of who we are. A book I was reading on leadership said that God layers our life with experiences, good and bad, and He uses our design and our experiences to shape us uniquely. There's a story of Joseph in the book of Genesis that's an amazing story of God's work through an individual. Through Joseph, all of Israel and all of Egypt was blessed. We often think of the verse near the end of the story about how Joseph saw that what his brothers had intended for evil, God had intended for good. In Genesis 50, verse 20. Some of you may not know the story, but Joseph's brothers actually sold him into slavery, and God used those circumstances for His glory. God clearly had a hand in the story, but I think what we often miss is how clearly Joseph's God-given design stood out and was the means by which Joseph thrived. The story starts in Genesis 39 with Joseph being a slave in Potiphar's house. Even as a slave, Joseph's skills and abilities as a manager and overseer stood out to such a degree that Joseph made him overseer of the entire household. Joseph went from Potiphar's household to prison due to being falsely accused. In the prison, Joseph's skills and abilities as a manager again surfaced, and he is entrusted with the care and management of the jail and all of the prisoners. A God-given ability to understand dreams leads Joseph from managing in the jail to an audience with Pharaoh, the ruler of Egypt. Pharaoh put Joseph in charge of managing all of Egypt to prepare for the severe famine that was coming. It'd be foolish to think that God wasn't in the mix and guiding Joseph's story. But what stands out so clearly is that Joseph had a clear design that enabled him to manage and provide leadership in many different settings. It was this design, this God-given ability, which God used for His purposes and His glory. I'm reminded of a line from the old movie Chariots of Fire, where the lead character says, "God made me fast, and when I run, I feel His pleasure." It's clear that God has given us both a design and many different experiences. And when we live out that design, we too can feel His pleasure. We can do what God has created us to do.
I love what Dave was just talking about right there, how God has ultimately designed our life and He has put this design upon us. And sometimes our design just shows up in places we don't expect. For me, this actually has to do with my cultural racial backgrounds. My mom was a Japanese Canadian, and my dad was a white Mennonite German Dutch mix. And that's the people who raised me. Both people were coming from different cultural backgrounds, different expectations of what culture should look like, but they found each other in marriage and in life, and they raised me. And so for me, a lot of my life was marked by realizing I was from two different worlds. One of them was Oriental Asian and the other one was white Canadian. And realizing that this sometimes caused me turmoil. But in the end, what God did with this is He helped me realize that because I had a unique perspective upon the world, that I saw two different sides of the world that sometimes don't see each other as much, I could act as a bridge. And so in my own family and in my own self, I realized my two cultural backgrounds are actually an asset and an advantage. And I found myself in many workplaces, in many different places, as being a bridge between two different people groups, as somebody who can see two different perspectives, but can reconcile it and realize that's just my perspective. I see two different worlds. And sometimes I found myself being in that person between the young and the old, or between two different cultural groups, or two different work groups, but realizing that God had gifted me with a perspective to see the world as bigger than just one side, but see the world as multiple different places that God can show His glory. And He's using my own life story of just being raised as a Japanese white family as a way to speak His truth and to see His design upon my life and bring that design to benefit and help others.